The following section of video shows the forward panel with the facing strip sewn to the front edge. It is a little easier to flatten the vinyl window on the canvas prior to installing the facing strip. So ignore that strip. It will be installed in the following or next step.
Okay, now we're going to get ready to mark our window. We like to mark it now because it's a lot easier while it's laying flat than once you get the other sections sewn onto it. So you always want to mark your window on the back side because you want to sew the window from the back side, and then it will be trimmed around on the front after it's installed from the back side of the cover. We have marked the end of where we want our window onto the front edge here when it was on the boat. You may or may not decide to do that, but anyway, with us marking ours, if you decide to do that, what you can do is just simply take where that line is and just crease your umbrella. And you can see the crease on the back side. So that is where we know that we're going to want the edge of our window to fall, is right inside that crease.
You'll do this on the opposite end as well.
It's going to start and come in.
Here are some guidelines for the top of our window.
Go to the very edge and mark down in 2 inches, because we know that at least 3/4 of an inch is going to be taken in by our seaming and our top stitching onto the top when we apply the two together. Plus you have a zipper that's going to be sewn in the top area. So we want to make sure that we get far enough below that. So 2 inches I would say would be the minimum. You can bring it, anywhere in between there. If you want a smaller window, of course, that's fine. But then you just go right along the top edge and mark every 2 inches down all the way across, and then you'll connect your line. You just follow from where your window starts till it ends all the way through the curve on the top, marking 2 inches down.
You'll notice the yardstick is perpendicular to the raw edge.
Now that we know this is going to be completely glass, you want to go ahead and make a cut right in the center, because once you get that glass sewn to the back, this side of it, you won't be able to get them pulled apart very easily, and you may scratch the glass. So we suggest that you put a big cut so that you can go underneath the glass and trim all this out once we have the glass installed. But we're going to show you how to do a little bit of an easier bottom edge for the window here. And we're going to measure up to where we're a little over 1 inch above our facing here. And then as we get over to the curve, this drop down curve, we're going to leave most of that in as above the facing, a little bit wider than what we have at this point. Now, if you have any type of thing that you can bend, some kind of a track or your ruler, if you happen to have a type of ruler like this, you can take something heavy and sit down to get a curve onto it.
By using a second helper, you can get a nice curve out of a ruler like this without having to use a heavy weight.
Right about where you want it, because you can always fair it up later if you don't like the way that it looks once it's on there, and just kind of give you an idea of where you can have it fall.
You'll want to repeat this approximate same shape on the opposite end. We'll not show that.
It kind of gives you a smooth line coming down here.
We'll now work with our vinyl window material.
I'm going to actually unroll it upside down so that it's curling inside toward the cover. That will help flatten it out.
Utilizing a second helper is helpful for laying out the glass.
Okay, now we have our window material down. We have our lines drawn on the inside of our front of our Dodger, and we have our window fabric on top. So we're going to put a couple tick marks, it's what I call it, where your lines are at on the cover. and it doesn't, they don't have to be centered or anything. This is just to reference your glass in place while you're cutting it or marking your piece out. And what we're going to do is you want to work from the center out in case there's any kind of curvature. That way you're not sliding your glass. And then these tick marks I use to locate and make sure that the window isn't moving.
This yellow grease pencil is great for marking on the window, but not as good for marking on Sunbrella.
Press on the outside edge as you're running it and just follow the line that you've made on your fabric underneath.
The main issue with the pencil is that it's hard to wash off the Sunbrella. Easy on the glass.
And while you're doing this, if it feels like anything's moving at all, you can always come back and make sure that your tick mark lines up with the one on your glass.
Will not show marking all the way around the window, but that's what you need to do.
Okay, so now we have our pattern all drawn in. So we can take our glass and cut our piece out that we're going to put onto here. And you might want to just turn that into a T so that you know it's top.
This vinyl material cuts nicely with just scissors. Just cut right along the line. Will not show this whole process.
So we're ready to install the glass to the Sunbrella to get ready to sew it. And we're going to go ahead and put basting tape on the underside of the window that's going toward the Sunbrella. And to keep it from being slid around and scratched, we can fold it against itself. And we'll work toward the center, and then we'll flip it, and we'll do the same to the other side.
If you have two people, it's easier just to flip the entire panel around and put the basting tape all around the outer perimeter. With one person, what Deb did here makes good sense.
Okay, we have our basting tape all on, and we're going to stick it down to the Sunbrella.
Peel off the paper backing, revealing the
And
glue.
you just place it right in where you drew your lines for the pattern. And baste it down against your Sunbrella.
Okay, we got a little bit of bubbling in the panel underneath, so what we're going to do is Deb's going to help me here, and I'm just going to use my arm without anything that will scratch the surface of the glass, and we're just going to slowly work all of this flat and down. That looks good. You just want to make sure that the Sunbrella and the glass are perfectly flat. Look good? Okay.
Now we're going to apply another line of basting tape all the way around the window, and then we're going to put flat binding around the edge. And we're also going to put basting tape on the binding. So once we get to that point, I'll show you that. But for right now, all we're doing is going right where the basting tape is on the underside, only putting it on the face. But yet we're still working on the inside of our cover.
Apply this basting tape around the entire perimeter of your window.
We have our basting tape down, and what's going to happen is we're bringing our flat binding right to the edge of the window so that you can't see the window, but yet it is right at the edge. And this is actually going to stick right onto here. Now what we want to do also is run some basting tape along what will be the inside edge of your flat binding. And that will help the inner edge stay flat as you're sewing. The other side we're going to be cutting out and hemming it in. And the binding, when you're on an inside curve, may want to bubble up like this on you, and when the machine runs over it, it may push it. So with this extra basting tape, it'll be taped down to the edge well, and we can also tape it down to the inner edge well so that it's already flattened down when your sewing machine comes across it. Okay, now we're going to start applying the binding, and as you see, we have one basting tape already on the window, and then one on the above edge where it's going to go down. So we want to start on the corner, and we can work this all the way to the other end. So you start with this, make sure that your basting tape that's on the binding is toward the inside so that that edge will be held down. And then you just start it with the outer edge even but not showing with the binding. And just work it down. And then you can just take this and cut it off at the edge of the window. And then when we come down the side, we'll be overlapping that corner. So we'll pull some of this tape off of the window, pull some off the binding, and then just continue all the way across. Okay, and just trim that end. Even with your window. Edge down, and this one, making sure that your basting tape again is toward the inside. You just want to overlap this end here, and you can trim that right down to the edge of the other binding that's underneath of it. We're going to go ahead and sew just on the outer edge of the binding. You don't want to sew in here yet, because what we have to do is on the other side we have to cut away for our window, and then we will be tucking in a 1/2 inch hem underneath the inside edge of the binding on the other side of the glass. So we only want to stitch on the outside edge right now just to hold the glass into place so that it won't be moving at all. Once we get that sewn on, then we can cut our fabric out for our window opening. You want to sew as close as you can to the outer edge, because that'll give you easier way to tuck it in, but you don't want to go off the edge. And if you have your binding right to the edge of your glass, there shouldn't be any problem with you catching it.
We'll sew around the entire perimeter of this glass window. When you get to a corner, do some reversing. Bury your needle, lift your foot, pivot on the needle, lower your foot, do some reversing, and continue sewing.
Okay, now, rather than cut out the window at this time, now we did remember have you make this slit ahead of time where you can see my hand coming through. So we're ready to be able to cut that out and finish around this window. The worst part about putting the window on is having it stay in place, which we have it anchored down now where it's going to be staying, and it won't be moving anywhere. So rather than cut the window out at this time, we're going to go ahead and assemble the whole rest of the top and leave that for last to save the glass from being scratched by the surface as we're finishing sewing it.
You will notice that the following video does not show the window installed. For ease of installation, we recommend you install the window prior to installing the facing strip.
Okay, now this is your front panel that the window will go into later. And we have our front facing, and what we're going to do is apply the front facing to it, and we'll be flipping the facing under and top stitching it down to give us a very sturdy front edge of it.
Deb's going to sew this without double-sided tape, but if you'd like, you can use double-sided tape to hold everything in place while you sew. The only warning is that you make sure that you don't sew into the double-sided tape, because if you do, when you flip the facing, you'll see the double-sided tape. You'll notice that Deb does a little bit of reversing at the beginning, and she'll also do that at the end. At the corner, she buries her needles, lifts her foot, lowers her foot, and continues to sew. This is a straight stitch a 1/2 inch from the raw edge of the fabric.
You can kind of walk the facing up to where we're going to take our first turn, just to make sure that your edges are going to fall flat and end at the same spot. And I like to hold it back about 1 foot or so, just to be sure that the fabric's not moving. If you want, you can run basting tape along this edge to help hold it in place.
You'll notice that as Deb feeds the fabric through the sewing machine, she uses her left arm to guide the fabric. That's the best way to feed fabric through a sewing machine without pulling on the top layer or the bottom layer while it's being sewn to keep from stretching it. Here, Deb's come up to the openings for the
This is gonna be a little
railing.
bit trickier because we're going to come up and sew around these cutouts.
You'll notice when Deb does a sharp turn, she buries her needle, lifts her foot, pivots on the needle, lowers her foot, and continues to sew.
You want to make sure your needle's down and just pivot right at the corner. Same way at the top.
Alright, we're going to skip ahead a little bit. We're going to do the same procedure when we come to the railing opens to the opposite side, and we're also going to show the control line opening. We've just completed sewing around the railing openings. Now we're coming to the control line opening. Want to keep this stitch a 1/2 inch away from the raw edge. And we're sewing a straight stitch. About 6 millimeters is sufficient. You can do more if you'd like. If your sewing machine doesn't do 6 millimeters, just make sure you do the longest stitch length possible. And we skip some of it, showing you the end here where she does some reversing to lock the stitch in place.
Is all of your little cutouts and turns are going to need a little bit of help when we get ready to reverse it. So you want to clip like inside of to here, just a little bit back from your stitches. Make sure you don't cut through them. Just to relieve that once it's turned, it makes it easier to flip. And then here we'll go probably about every 1/2 inch or less. Just make some clips all the way around your arch. Stay back from your stitching. Okay, now here we're going to actually cut this tip right off, being careful not to get into your stitches because we don't need all that bulk inside when we try to turn this. Same way on these corners. And then inside here again we want to cut up to, but not through your stitching.
We'll do that to the same railing openings on the opposite side. We'll not show that.
So what you're going to want to do is base the edge and just fold it down toward your seams a 1/2 inch. And then we'll run all the way around that with a 1/2 inch hem. Okay, we're taping down the hem that we're going to put into the facing here. If it's not exactly a 1/2 inch, it really doesn't make that much difference. This is just more or less going to give you a finished edge for on the front. Okay, now on the inner curves, you might want to clip in. Now you don't want to clip any more than a 1/2 inch because you don't want that edge to come up to where your finished edge is going to be from the hem, but it will help you go around the curved edge side. And then your bulk, you just kind of work in on the outer curves. And what we're going to do is we're going to flip it completely upside down and pull the facing out toward you so the hem is toward you. Okay, this is the inside.
Deb will again sew with a straight stitch, approximately a ½ inch from the folded hem. This stitch will not be seen. It'll be on the underside near the deck of the boat. We'll sew it down its entire length. Here we are at the opposite end. Do some reversing.
Okay, got that done. So what we're going to do now is turn this over. And again, this will go toward the inside of the cover. Bring our little flaps out.
The sout and pout are facing the table. Turning these assemblies right side out can be quite cumbersome, but it can be done.
And your little cutouts here, they might take a little bit of coaxing out. Okay, and just take a screwdriver and push those out. Same way here. This tip. Okay.
If you've got small little openings that need to come out, take your time. Use something like a screwdriver and just keep reversing it until eventually you come up against your stitch line.
Sometimes if you have real tight points like we do here, if you go in with your pin or something, that won't harm your cover, and just pull the rest of the way out. Works pretty well. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to hold this edge flat, and we're going to top stitch maybe 1/8 of an inch in, just as close to the edge as we can. And that'll hold our facing down. And then we can stitch it across the whole top. So we're going to start here. As you notice, we've got the seam sandwiched in there, and you want to push that seam so that it is as close to the edge as you can possibly get it. This has got a sharp turn on it, so we want to get that laid up ahead of the foot of the machine.
This straight stitch will be visible from the front side of your Dodger. So keep it nice and straight and keep it approximately an 1/8 inch from that folded
Just kind of work
seam.
6 inches to 12 inches, whatever feels comfortable for you in front of your foot here, and just sew up to the point that you have flattened out. It's kind of a tedious working job, but it's well worth it in the end. And underneath, you can just kind of take this and push it toward the outside as you're folding it, and it'll bring that out to the edge. And just kind of pinch it down. And again, on your corners, you're going to want to lift your foot and pivot. Okay, and we come across to this next corner. Pivot around that corner. Up to here. Pivot again. In. Again, you always want to make sure that in front of your foot is readily laid flat to sew down as you're coming up to these points. Otherwise, you could pinch your facing underneath. So you want to make sure that you're at least 4 to 6 inches out from your foot when you're working in tight areas.
We'll not show the rest of this procedure, but just continue all the way to the end.
Okay, now we have that all stitched down. And it kind of makes a little shelf out of it, which is good for the front because the windshield will be going in here, and this can shelf out and we can snap our snaps in place once we get it finished and out to the boat. Okay, now that we have the top stitching edge done, now we flip it back over. So we have the inside up, and what we're going to do is come through here, and we're just going to stitch that right down to the front piece, right where we made our hem. Now you can follow the line. It really doesn't make that much difference because you're only going to have one stitch line showing to the outside here. But it does kind of give you a guideline to go by when stitching it down.
This step is fairly easy. Just keep that flat and keep that stitch on top of the other stitch. This stitch will be visible from the outside of the Dodger.
Now make sure that it's laid nice and flat.
If your stitch isn't directly on top of the other stitches, that's no big deal. This is the only stitch you'll see from the outside of the Dodger.
Again, you want to go from the outside edge in for the flatness of it. You don't want to pull this way because it could tend to make your cover twist. But if it lays, it should lay just flat because it's mirror image of the top that we're doing. The front of our Dodger. And just like I said, keep it flat from the bottom edge in.
We're not going to show this whole procedure here. Go all the way to the opposite end.